Hello, hello. How you guys doing? I know, I missed one last week, didn't I? Just like I did the week before, you know. I'm slacking, man. You're starting to feel like after episode 25 now that the momentum is slowing down. But in my defense, you know, I had to postpone the one last week because, you know, there was a major, significant global, if not, you know, at least national event in the death of the Queen. I was literally about to press the button on the Frank Turner episode when somebody said to me, "Hey man, have you heard the news?" And I was like, "Oh, well, I'm not going to post the fucking my podcast episode now." You know what I mean? I'll be like, "In other news, check out my podcast." So I decided to postpone the episode with Frank Turner, which pushed us into the following week. And then I went on holiday and I had a cancellation of one of my guests as well. So a couple of things happened whereby one episode came out within like a kind of 2.5 week period. I can't remember. Who cares? What matters is we're still going, baby. And here we are. We're back with a brand new episode. And boy, what an episode this is going to be. I have been hounding today's guest like a mad dog. I recently read a book called Giants by an author called Peter Phillips, who's a professor of political sociology at Sonoma State University in America. And I mean it with 100% sincerity when I say that the book Giants by Peter Phillips is one of the best books I have ever read. It's left a lasting impact on me. I'm looking at it right now, and I know that it's going to be a book that I'm going to be going back to time and time again. Now, we talk a lot on the podcast about the elite and the rich and the powerful and the rule makers and who runs the world and that sort of thing. But who exactly are we talking about when we say things like the elite and the rich and the powerful? Who exactly are we talking about? Well, Peter Phillips has put together a directory of 389 of the world's elite, most powerful people. These are the people that essentially run the world, named by name, with a little bio on each of them showing you where they went to university, the companies that they're a part of, the boards that they're a member of, the institutions that they function in. And you get to see a bit of a pattern when you look through these lists. Now, this is fascinating stuff. This is the world's most powerful elite named by name. It's personifying what we often talk about in vague abstract terms, such as the elite and the powerful. And trust me, you haven't heard of a single damn one of them, because neither did I. But if you stick around to the end of the podcast, I am going to name a ton of them for you straight from the book so that you can go and do your own research and get an insight into exactly what I'm talking about here, because you'll be like, who are these people? I've never heard of them, but oh my God. Now, I know that when you get into this nature of inquiry, you can sometimes skirt dangerously close to the realm of conspiracy theory. This is not that book, trust me. This is painstakingly researched and meticulously put together in a really simple to read, digestible book, which I read in like a few days. Honestly, it's such an easy read. It sounds like it's going to be heavy going, but it's not. In the book, Peter Phillips simplifies it by laying it out into 4 separate layers. At the top, you've got what he calls the giants. Now, it's essentially 17 asset management firms that control pretty much everything else that happens on planet Earth. 17! Beneath that, he's put what he calls the facilitators. Now, this is institutions such as like the IMF, the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, the Trilateral Commission, the World Economic Forum, Davos, Bilderberg Group, Council of Foreign Relations. Basically, the social clubs where all these elite members develop their relationships with each other, cut deals, strengthen their class connections, and basically stay relevant within the world within which they operate. The even scarier thing about that, though, is that if you look at who is also a member of these social clubs, and of course Peter Phillips lays it all out in the chapter that deals with the facilitators, he names them all by name, which is the theme of the book. You'll also see prime ministers, presidents, members of parliament, royal family members, media moguls. And you get to see how all these threads of power basically fit together and merge through these institutions such as the Trilateral Commission and the Council of Foreign Relations and the Atlantic Council. Because it's not just these super rich financier guys. It's, heads of military, intelligence officers and policy advisors and members of think tanks. They're all part of the same club. It's the same names time and time again. You see them in the chapter where he deals with the giants, you see them in the facilitators, and you see them in other chapters as well. It's just a revolving buffet of the same really, really rich dudes where the lines are blurred between government, finance, military, and media. It's absolutely fucking terrifying. But Peter lays out exactly who these guys are by name. It's such a unique and brilliant idea. And the book, like I said, it's a short read. It's very concise. It's not overly academic or anything like that. Peter lays out the purpose of each of the four layers, and then he describes who the members are of those layers and how they interact with the others. It's a brilliant, fascinating, really important work. And you know when something's good when you've got Noam Chomsky on the front saying, and this is a quote, "Who exactly are the masters? This remarkable inquiry lifts the veil, providing detailed and often shocking revelations. When Chomsky says you're cool, you know you're cool." So I want to bring on the guest and stop waffling now. I hope I've bigged up the book enough for you guys to rush out and get a copy. It's called Giants by Peter Phillips. It's out now on 7 Stories Press. It's actually a few years old. So one can only assume that things have gotten so much better, right? Well, let's find out. So Peter Phillips has been a professor of political sociology at Sonoma State University since 1994. He is a former director of Project Censored and a former president of the Media Freedom Foundation. He is also a multi-award-winning, highly acclaimed author, and it's his absolutely incredible latest book, Giants, which I'll be mostly speaking with him about today. So Peter, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. It's a real treat. How are you doing, sir?
Great, James. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for being with us, man. I really do appreciate it. And as I said in the intro there, I'm a huge fan of the book. I think it's a really important work, and hats off and kudos to yourself for putting together such a brilliant and important book. I think for people who haven't yet read the book, a good place to start would be a simple question, which I think is probably going to open up a Pandora's box. The book is called Giants. So who are the Giants?
The Giants are trillion-dollar investment companies. Like BlackRock and JP Morgan Chase. They invest people's money, multimillionaires, give them millions of dollars, and then they'll invest it in the market and try to get a guaranteed return in the 7% plus rate. And as we looked at this, we started to realize that these are really giant companies. They $1 trillion, it's 1,000 billions. And some of these companies in 2017 were, 4 trillion or 2 trillion. I mean, just massive amounts of money there. And there were 17 companies in 2017 that were $1 trillion, had over $1 trillion in assets. Now, what we're working on right now is an update to that. And today, there are 31 companies that are giants, that have over $1 trillion in assets. And the original 17 have mostly doubled their assets in the last 5 years.
Wow.
So we look at who's managing these companies, who's on their board of directors, and do kind of identify them and say, okay, fellas, it's time that we really address some of the concerns about wealth concentration in the world and what's happening. The environmental concerns, the concerns of increased poverty in the world, and access to resources that have been privatized and maintained for personal self-interest.
These 31 mega firms that you're talking about, then, they're important to be singled out because essentially they sit at the top of the pyramid, don't they? Their tentacles infiltrate pretty much everything else on the planet, don't they? Is that why you focused on, in the book, what was 17 mega firms, which now you've just said is 31? Is that because essentially they are the top of the food chain?
Yeah, well, they manage free-flowing capital. So, I mean, corporations have assets. They have buildings and patents and equipment and production kinds of things. What we're talking about here is free-flowing capital in the world. And that's massively increased. There's been this financialization process of trying to monetize literally everything in the world and to make returns on it. So the companies with the largest amount to invest have a huge impact on what's going on in the world. And one of our biggest concerns, of course, is the environmental issues that the world is facing today is literally threatening human existence.
One of the questions I wanted to come on to, but I'll save it for a bit, is with regards to that, the people, the actual human beings behind this, and what is the conflict there between what they do for a living and their role in the world, and I'm certain an awareness that they must have of the effects of that. But I'm going to park that up because I want to delve more into the mechanics of how this system works. Because in the book, you describe it in 4 separate but interlinked layers. So at the top, you've got the giants. Then you've got the facilitators, you've got the protectors, and you've got the ideologues. So if we could briefly run through those one at a time. So the giants you've just explained are these 31 mega asset management firms that sit pretty much at the top of the food chain. Beneath that, then, you've got the facilitators. Now, these are organizations such as the IMF, the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, the G7. Could you explain the nature of these institutions and the role they play in keeping this system afloat?
Well, what we're looking at over the last quarter century or more has been the globalization of capital. And when we say that, we create these companies that are managed capital, and governments support them in the ability to invest and get returns literally anywhere in the world. So these big capital investment companies, they very much would like to be furthering their investment capabilities in Africa or in Siberia. Around the world. And so their policies are to try to have free flow capital, no interference from governments in terms of capital and profit taking. So that is an important thing to understand, that this capital is so heavily concentrated that back in 2017, less than 200 people controlled $41 trillion worth of wealth. So they were the ones making the decisions about how it would be invested. So if they invest in armament companies or they invest in everything. And their biggest problem is they have more capital than they have safe places to invest. And that's where government will step in and try to open up investment opportunities for them and to try to protect these interests. Intelligence agencies work on their behalf, governments work on their behalf. It's not like these elites in these companies will tell the president to say, well, you do this. Who's ever president in the country knows that they have to maintain and support global capital, and that they're going to do what they can to protect that and not see a economic decline. So the conflict is that they have so much capital, they don't have enough places to do it, to invest it, that are safe. And back in 2008, we saw kind of an economic collapse for a while because these companies were doing speculative investments on subprime mortgages and lost a lot. And it literally came close to collapsing the economy in the world. So that kind of concentration of wealth only increases the risks of global economic collapse, because very few people they're all beating each other, they're invested in each other. So we're talking about in 2017, $41 trillion that were managed by less than 200 people. And those people interact with the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, their own governments, making policy decisions, or making recommendations for policy decisions that governments can do. And governments respond to that. They're more than willing to try to get them to continue to grow and expand. The difficulty that arises is a lack of safe investment opportunities. These companies are investing in things that hurt us, whether it's food or arms or companies that are affecting the environment, burning coal, companies that are digging coal and burning it. All of that is invested by these giants, and they help make it happen. So we're seeing in environmental concerns that threaten the human species in the world today. We're seeing wars, and the war in Ukraine is one example of that, but we're seeing the preparation for war, the expenditures of mass billions of dollars on military expenditures. And these are, when we say that, you say we're going to spend $1 billion and give it to Ukraine to fight the Russians. That money is being spent to buy products from companies that make weapons, and or even in some cases private mercenaries that are engaged in this war. And so this violence, these wars are very profitable. And so continuing to prepare for war is in many ways more profitable than trying to invest in companies that are overinvested already and they're not getting good returns. So it's a massive conflict that threatens human existence.
What a crazy system we live within. I mean, this might seem like a really naive question, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. I mean, why is the whole house of cards dependent upon there being such a extreme concentration of wealth right at the top of the pyramid? Why is that so essential to the way that the world's economy is structured? I mean, we've got a fixed amount of capital in a closed system. So why is it so important that capital is all concentrated in one tiny percentage of the world's population? Why couldn't that same amount of money within the same closed system be distributed more equally? And why can't that money be pooled into things that benefit the bulk of humanity, regardless of whether it makes a profit or not, rather than just building up and up and up and up within the ever-diminishing confines of less than 1% of the world's population?
Well, we could. The 1% could accept a philosophical approach to protect the environment, to have shared governance, to have sustainability. And some of them have begun to recognize that we're facing world economic collapse and environmental destruction and the threat of nuclear war. And there have been forming what's called EGS, environment, government, and social policies within these companies, these investment companies that are supposedly designed to prevent world economic collapse, world environmental collapse, because they're worried about it. These are people and they have children and grandchildren, and they're worried about the long-term capital, but they also want to protect their investment, to protect private capital and continue to see it grow. And the more it grows, the more power they have in terms of where they can decide to invest it and engage with it. So some of them have a conscience to speak of, but and part of that is reflected by the World Economic Forum and their effort towards a great reset of capitalism. So they're saying we're going to maintain capitalism. It's going to become more conscious. It's going to be bring about human betterment. But unfortunately, the opposite of happening is happening. There's greater poverty in the world. There's greater threats of war. The environment is facing, climatic, change, massive change. So I think we're looking at Tampa, in the next 24, 48 hours is going to be heavily impacted by this massive hurricane that hasn't happened there in 100 years.
Oh, man. Oh, this is one of the things that really confuses me, is because, as you said, these are people. They've got children and grandchildren and hopes and dreams, and they're also highly educated people, as you show in the book. They've all been through elite universities and privately educated, so they're not unintelligent. So how do they marry that conflict between an awareness of their role in the world and the consequences of it, whilst clinging to a belief that capitalism still works, when it quite clearly doesn't?
They actually believe in the trickle-down theory.
People actually believe that.
They believe that they're by concentrating wealth, that they will be able to grow and expand and help, eliminate poverty in the world and that. But that's simply not true. World poverty is massively increased. People are becoming, we have huge homeless problems. There's all kinds of social issues that we're faced with. And their continued concentration of wealth is a factor that directly contributes to all the negative things that are happening in society.
And they must know that, though, surely, or do they live in such a bubble?
I think that they do, or they know it to a certain extent. But they believe that capitalism can continue to grow and expand, and then that will trickle down, give people jobs, and really make the world a better place. That's simply not true. All the indicators are that we're going in the opposite direction, and that we are faced with catastrophic potential for increased mass famine, environmental destruction, destroying of the oceans, and the inability to use land, the use of pesticides and growth products in agriculture that are concentrated for more return. It's not a good scenario. And so as people who study transnational capitalist class, they realize that the World Bank and the World Economic Forum and the various world organizations are being established to help facilitate capital concentration, get private wealth controlling and making decisions worldwide and protecting that wealth, and it's moving in the direction of a global class of people, like 1% or less, that are the elites, and they all have similar lifestyles. They went to similar schools.
Yep.
They're all worth millions. If you're on the board of directors of one of these giants, you're getting a salary of at least $250,000, and you get free stock.
Right.
So you could be, a person with, a few $100,000 worth of wealth, and you get placed on one of these boards. In a couple of years, you're going to be a multimillionaire.
Well, you refer to them in the book as the transnational capitalist class. So this is essentially a class, isn't it?
It's a global capitalist class,
right?
Because they know each other, they interact globally, and even in China, there's more billionaires than there are in the U.S., and their wealth is highly concentrated as well. But their government is managed by the Politburo and the Communist Party, whereas ours is maintained through Citizens United and private capital, buys people and they win elections, and it's strongly influenced by private capital.
Well, I grabbed a bit from the book, which I thought highlighted the severity of this in terms of the numbers. And in the book, you say that the transnational capitalist class is essentially 17 megafirms. Of these 17 megafirms, there are 199 core individuals that control them. Now, of these less than 200 individuals, 70% are male, 84% are white. Almost all of them have attended elite private schools and elite universities. 59% of them are from the USA, and the rest are mostly from Europe. Most of them serve as advisors or members of the IMF, the WTO, the World Bank, the G7, the G20, the WEF, the Trilateral Commission, and the Council on Foreign Relations, and many, many others that you can think of. Now, we're talking about less than 200 people here, man. Now, that is a lot of power and a lot of wealth to be concentrated in the hands of less than 200 people working for less than 18 companies in the world. Like, that to me is absolutely terrifying when you think of the power that they wield over policies and constructs that affect the lives of everybody else on the planet. I mean, that is terrifying, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's such a concentration of wealth. It's very undemocratic. This is privatized capital. In the book, we have a letter to the global power elite as a postscript. And we're basically telling them that they cannot continue. It's no longer acceptable for you to believe that you can manage capitalism to grow its way out of growth inequalities we all face. The environment could not accept more pollution and waste, and civil unrest everywhere is inevitable at some point. So we're seeing, more books now where, like William Robinson's book last year was called The Global Civil War. And he's saying that he's a transnational capitalist class scholar. He wrote the Introduction to Giants, and he's at UC Santa Barbara, and someone who's really made their career focusing on who the global power elite are. And, we're saying that this cannot continue. And it's signed by 109 or people or so, including William Robinson and a number of others that recognize that this problem is ongoing and it is not being reversed. And no matter what level of consciousness they have in this whole EGS, environmental governance and social awareness, has been in the last, particularly since COVID, over the last couple of years, all these companies are starting to say, well, we're more concerned about this now, and we're going to try to do better and that. But the structure of concentrated wealth and capitalism is literally irreversible without some major intervention and democratic movements that create laws that use that capital for human betterment instead of private wealth.
Well, I have a lot of causes highlighted on the podcast, from activists and campaigners, investigative journalists and politicians, etc. And every single issue seems to end at that same point of we need systemic change. Like all of these things can be easily remedied if we just had the political action to do so. I mean, just off the top of my head, there are tons of things we could do to remedy this particular situation. We can put caps on what one individual can earn relative to everybody else in society or within their organization. We could raid the tax havens. We could put regulations in place to say that the bulk of the produce from collective society gets distributed in a manner that benefits that society rather than floating upwards towards the top 1%. These are all things that could happen tomorrow. We just need politicians and governments to enact it into law, and then there it is.
Yeah, except there's other people pushing the other way. BlackRock, the world's largest money manager, received a letter from 19 Republican state attorneys accusing them of using a climate agenda ahead of clients' profits. And that they are accusing BlackRock of boycotting like coal companies and this. And so BlackRock has said that they have never dictated emissions targets to any company, and it doesn't coordinate, but their wealth, their 8-9 trillion now that they're managing, if they try to cut back on, they're going to get sued.
Right.
And so I call them the neocons, or the far right-wing Republicans and economic people in power in various places, are challenging any effort to not allow, full-blown capital to invest anywhere it wants to, and to get good returns for their clients. And that's scary because these companies, they can make decisions. I mean, I looked up a couple of weeks ago. There's a very big concern with private weapons in the U.S. There's all these school shootings. There's been mass murders, AR-15s and semi-automatic weapons of various sorts. There's only a couple of companies that make those. And there's BlackRock right in the top of their investors and JP Morgan Chase. So if you're saying, well, how come there's so many AR-15s and people can get them? The states allow people to buy them, and any effort to restrict them challenged by people who are concerned with the Second Amendment. And so these giant companies are part and contributing to the ability to people to buy these weapons and then shoot up their neighborhood.
Yeah.
It's quite concerning when you talk about it. And what we're moving towards now is identifying what's happened since 2017. The Giants book was based on 2017 data, and most of that data came from the Giants, the transnational capital corporations. It came from their own proxy reports. So if you read, if they're a public corporation, they have to issue an annual report. And in that report is not only who are their board of directors, how much they're paid, how much stock they hold, what their main policies are. And so you can read all this and identify, who's doing what. You can check their investment portfolios and see where they're invested, what kind of coal or environmental destructive companies they're invested in, or weapons companies that they're invested in, and how that wealth continues to concentrate, and that the 80% of the world people live on less than $10 a day, and half the world lives on less than $3 a day.
Yeah.
So this 1% that owns almost half the world's wealth, and then manage the top 20% of the people. If you're a multi-millionaire, you can stick $1 million in one of these companies, and they'll invest it for you and get you a 7% return. So there's thousands. I think there's 60 million millionaires, and their money is being managed by these private companies. And there's only the 31 giants now is double, so it's certainly concentrated. But of the 17 companies that were giants in 2017, 8 of them, the same 8 companies, now have more wealth than they did in all of collectively in 2017.
Jesus Christ!
So that's over $50 trillion. The top 8
that's insane
companies today have 50 trillion. So what we're doing is I'm building a new book, which hopefully will be done in the spring. It'll be called Titans of Capital. And we'll be looking at what's happened to the 17 companies that we identified 5 years ago. Their boards of directors are still about half the same people. People die, they retire, they go to other places, but they're replaced by people of very similar backgrounds. Wealth, income, family connections, and private universities, and social interactions through various private clubs like the Bohemian Club I'm going to write about in this book. Facilitate a transnational class interaction with a few million people in the world, and then these places like Davos, where the World Economic Forum hosts 3,000 or 4,000 people every year, and then their policies that they're trying to engage with and help improve. They're talking about human betterment, but in reality, they actually are continuing to concentrate wealth, and that leads to greater famine and uneasiness and wars and civil resistance to that kind of privatization. So if half the world's living on $3 a day, and the rest of the world is living on $10 a day, this inequality is going to stress out the world, so to speak, in very negative ways.
Yeah.
So the famine that we're seeing in Africa, the continued global warming threats, massive storms and environmental damage, all of that is increasing and being driven by wealth concentration, trying to get a return and force returns in whatever place that they possibly can. And that's threatening to all of us.
It seems to me that it's sociopathy and insanity manifested through economics. It's essentially what it seems to me. This is completely undurable and unsustainable, and there has to be a breaking point. If not, then the whole planet that all of us live on.
A breaking point's inevitable.
Yeah,
it's inevitable. And people who are billionaires or millionaires and have these assets want to continue to concentrate. There is a kind of social pathology that goes with that. I'm getting mine. I'm going to increase my wealth. I'm going to share it with my children. And hopefully we'll have plenty of police state capabilities within our class to control the masses of people worldwide. So that nation states literally become population containment zones, and have their own militaries and their own police force to control mass resistance or people who are starving and trying to force taxation or force rich folks to share their wealth. They're not planning to do that. They want to continue to concentrate and grow wealth. And that's destroying the world.
It's literally insanity. It seems to me that it is ideological fanaticism. Is it capitalistic fanaticism or fundamentalism? Would you describe it that way? I mean, it seems to be a completely blinkered, religious almost belief in the virtues of capitalism, despite the glaring evidence to the contrary.
Well, James, you're saying it quite well. I mean, that's what Giant's book said 5 years ago. And it's gotten, all I can tell you is it's gotten worse.
Jeez.
And that the wealth concentration is greater. They're manipulating governments, and worldwide bribery occurs often. It's a corrupting influence to human survival.
Right.
I can't say it. I don't think I can say it any other way.
No, but you said it brilliantly throughout the whole book, so people need to go and read the book, really. But what I love about the book is that I listening to this conversation today, it could sound very heavy and almost academic because of the research-based nature of it, but it's actually really, really readable. I whizzed through it in like a few days, and it's absolutely fascinating. But what you've managed to do is condense all of this really meticulously researched information and communicated it in a really readable and quite simplified way without losing any of the thrust of the points that you're making. I think it's very unique in that way. It's a very readable book, and it was mind-blowing for myself. It's one that I'll keep going back to, because one of the things I found fascinating was that at no point when I'm looking through these biographies of these these top 389 individuals, at no point did I see a mention of Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, or any of the guys that we know of as being like the richest guys in the world. In fact, as I skimmed through the book, I hardly recognized any of them.
They're in there, but they're in there in a minor way. I mean, Gates uses his foundation to try to influence world health issues, but he's well known. But it's the decision makers around how these trillions of dollars of capital are invested. I mean, Bill Gates is a billionaire. But if you're sitting on a board of directors of a corporation that has $8 trillion worth of wealth, in many ways you have more influence on capitalism than Bill Gates.
Right.
Or Bezos.
Yeah.
They get the attention because they're individuals, and, people they say, oh, we all want to be rich. And that's simply not true. Most people want to have security and a way of getting by. But if you start acquiring money just to have it, and massively, privately own it and benefit and not use it in any way to help other people, that's, I think, wrong, morally wrong.
Yeah.
And we need to require these elites through democratic social movements at a state level and an international level as well, require them to move towards human betterment in using that capital that benefits everybody in the world.
Yeah.
But it's become privatized, and they continue to make that even greater extent. So Gates people like him they're more concerned with overpopulation. That 1 billion people or 8 billion people is too many for the planet, which is partially correct. But people have babies and children as a means of, for most people in the world, it's a means of old age protection.
Yeah.
So if you have 5 kids and you get old, you can't work or anything, the kids will take care of you. And that's a strategy that's been around since human beings have been on this earth.
Yeah.
And, so you build your family and your clan and you work together. But the idea that one person would have all the wealth in that clan is just unheard of, philosophically or historically or anthropologically in world history. We've reached that point today in less than 200 years of concentrated capitalism worldwide that has so massively concentrated and kept it that way that the inequality is terminal for the world. And we have to use democratic social movements, awarenesses of that, ultimately to force through nonviolent social movements would be my preference, but ultimately force these elites. So part of my effort is to identify who these titans are, and that's the terminology we're using in the next book. And we're looking at the top 10 investment companies, which now will have close to $50 trillion worth of wealth. Which they doubled those.
Christ. Absolutely
and they're
insane.
basically the same ones that were there in 2017. They're basically the same people managing them. They lose 1 or 2 on their board each year. So their boards are still about half the same people. And they are making public relations statements about their concerns for the environment and democracy and governments, but they're in reality, the money is not being put to that kind of use. So we have the facilitators in the book, the giants. There are the elite policy planners, and there's organizations like the Atlantic Council, which is the private non-governmental advisory body to NATO and the world capitalist countries' military systems. The Atlantic Council puts out reports on a regular basis. They have a couple hundred members. They have a board of directors of 15 or so individuals. And they're the ones saying it's time for Putin to be removed.
Right.
But they've been saying that for 10 years. And he's fully aware of that. And they're the ones that were establishing the policy that spent $4 billion to promote governmental change in the Ukraine and push out a pro-Russian government and bring back basically the elements of the fascist government that had been there and fought against Russia during World War II. And so, of course, Putin was upset by that. Or so were anybody in the Kremlin who sees that kind of money being spent on the Ukraine, saw the collapse of the Soviet Union, saw NATO expand even further to their borders in Poland and the other countries near them, threatening militarily and economically, and pushing for the collapse of Russia, not just the Soviet Union, and a regime change. And they just write that and say, we want to see this happen. We want Putin to be pushed out. And he reads this stuff, or they read it, and they know exactly what the Atlantic Council is trying to make happen. And this is all private money that funds the Atlantic Council, and big corporations are involved and help pay for it. And then, of course, they own the corporate media. So the book in chapter 6 talks about the public relation firms
Yes.
and the global media.
Yeah.
Big private PR firms are packaging what the world is finding out on television, news, and newspapers.
Terrifying. Yeah.
And these are all owned and controlled by the global power elite, the titans of capital, have economic control over the world's media, and so you don't see criticisms of capitalism on most media shows. They just don't go there.
That chapter, The Ideologues, is absolutely terrifying. It was one of the most terrifying ones for me, because even though I've read books like Manufacturing Consent by Noam Chomsky and things, just seeing those same people popping up time and time again on the boards, and the CEOs of these massive PR and media companies also attending, Davos, the Trilateral Commission, and all the same clubs. And you just get to see that time and time again, it's the same clubs, it's the same people, and they all infiltrate all layers of this, whether it's the financial side of it, or the media side of it, or the military industrial side of it. It's the same tiny handful of really, really rich, powerful people that permeate all of it.
And there's been the continued financialization of capitalism, meaning money today is not in most of the money today is not invested in productive activities. So if you invest in GM's building cars. But most of the capital today is free-floating speculative capital. And so people are making money by and betting on the value of money. And will the yen change relative to the dollar? Or financialization is literally the putting a monetary value on everything in the world. And this that monetary value is controlled by increasingly fewer and fewer people that dominate which direction the world is going.
Yeah.
And they own and control the corporate media. They own and control private military companies like BlackRock, which is one of the largest, and GTS is one of the other large ones. And they can put mercenaries or privatized police anywhere in the world and control populations violently. So that kind of ability to literally kill anybody in the world they choose makes me think that we just literally have to have a nonviolent social resistance of non-cooperation with global capital until they agree to start sharing it and doing the things with that wealth that are needed to maintain the world and keep children from starving and protect us from diseases that threaten our whole existence.
Well, I want to come into, when we wrap up, I want to ask you about change and what can people do. But I'm still stuck on this the ideology side of it, because I just can't wrap my head around how intelligent, worldly people can not understand the conflict here. And I know that obviously all of these people are educated in many of the same places, and I'm sure that they're all taught the same ideology in these institutions, in these private and elite universities. What role do the universities play in that, and why? I mean, I can't imagine that the professors such as yourself, who teach at these universities where some of these giants come through, I can't imagine that they are part of the elite, So what adherence do they have to this ideology, which is quite plainly flawed?
Well, those that support global capitalism and concentration and really believe that there will be an economic wealth will grow so rapidly that it'll save the world, they are the ones, of course, that elites will invite to be speakers and be on policy boards and that. If you don't have that kind of support, or you're not taking that kind of a position, you can be a professor at a university, you can talk to 100 kids a year, and that's not going to bring about major change in the world.
Right.
I was been a professor for 26 years at Sonoma State University. It was basically a working class university. Had lots of great students, but not one, not any that are capable of organizing resistance that will impact the global power elite, at least not in any immediate way. But so that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, because I look at how concentrated wealth is, how much more it's concentrated in the last 5 years, and we're going in a direction that inevitably is unsustainable.
Yeah.
Environmentally, economically, socially, it's unsustainable, and we are faced with either the possible environmental, economic collapse, or perhaps even both simultaneously, with efforts by governments and intelligence agencies to repress resistance, population resistance, and massive deaths from local resistance and civil wars.
Yeah.
That is our future if we can't force those kinds of changes to come about immediately. So I believe that by writing this book, by identifying the people that are making this happen, none of them are evil people per se. They're probably all nice to their dog and their grandkids, but they control wealth and resources that should belong to the world.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're coming from the world, but now less than 1% of the people have gained control. So we're, in a way, it's going back to feudalism.
Yeah.
Where most of us are, peasants with very little ability to affect anything in the world. And there's the royalty, or the people I will call the titans in the next book, titans of capital, who are in control, who dominate, and believe that they're doing the best thing for the world and, of course, for themselves. And that is dangerous, and we have to call them out on it. And we need to identify who this is and how they're engaged. And it's been shown, like Jamie Dimon at Chase Manhattan, the people have protested in front of his home, and he has made some efforts to have environmental consequences addressed by their investment policies. There are people, of course, that resist that quite openly, and we see some efforts, but it's not enough. It's not fast enough. And one or two individuals are not going to be able to make this happen. It's going to have to be democratic. It's going to have to be people making the decisions about the resources in the world that are privately held, and either acquiring those via taxation and government control, or literally occupying those places of power.
Or it's going to happen the other way, because people are going to, the temperature's going to get so hot and it's going to burst, and there's going to be mass civil unrest and rioting and violence and destruction, because people aren't going to take it anymore. They're going to get too desperate. You can see that happening already over here in Britain with the energy crisis and the cost of living crisis, and Brexit, and the middle class is now getting squeezed. The poor are always getting squeezed, but as soon as the middle class start getting squeezed, well, now that's half the population right there. So.
And the conservative right-wing governments that are now in Italy, or basically in Great Britain, Germany, are supportive of global capital and want to protect it. And the ideologists will blame immigrants.
Yeah.
And for, people that are fleeing and trying to save themselves from violence and environmental destruction around the world. Millions and millions of people are moving with their feet and resisting with their bodies and their presence in the capital wealth countries. That kind of repression could get quite severe and extremely deadly for many of us.
Yeah, there could be a breaking point coming, I think, because as soon as you see this pattern of a shift to the right, which is happening, as you say, all over Europe, I think that's symptomatic of something further down the line coming, a shift in society. I think the shift to the right is often an indicator of anger and a sense of disenfranchisement and disillusionment. And I think that can often be expressed in pretty ugly ways that are far from democratic and peaceful.
Yeah. I'm afraid that you're right. And it's going to take millions of people with shared consciousness of what needs to happen and a building of democratic sharing. We also call that socialism of the world's wealth, and making sure that that child born in a deprived country has an opportunity to live and grow up and bring and contribute to humanity through their work and their actions.
Yeah. I mean, the solutions to all of this have existed for a long time. It's not rocket science, is it? We know what the social safety nets are. We know what the, you said the dirty word yourself, socialism. Socialism works in the favor of society. Capitalism works in the favor of capital, So, the solutions that are tried and tested, they do work. I live in a country that used to have socialist economic principles, National Health Service, free university education, and nationalized energy and nationalized public transport and stuff. These are not complicated or esoteric concepts. They're tried and tested, and they work in the interests of the bulk of society. And they're there for the taking, but they've been stolen and locked away by a sociopathic, less than 1% class of ideological, religiously fundamentalist madmen.
You got to write a book yourself.
I did write one, but it was all about myself.
I recommend a new one that just came out by William Robinson. Can Global Capitalism Endure?
Okay.
And it just came out. It's literally a 3-hour read, if that. But he's laying out all the weaponized transnational capital class, weaponizing ideology, weaponizing central control, and saying that inevitably capitalism will collapse. And he's quite good at explaining why. And I think my book and the one I'm working on now is going to be very complementary to that.
Right. Thanks for the tip off, man. I will be buying that bad boy tonight and adding it to my ever-increasing bedside table reading collection.
I recommend it.
Well, I know I don't have you for much longer, so I'm going to try and... There's tons of things I wanted to ask you, and I don't have time to ask you all of them. But one of the things I definitely wanted to squeeze in before I let you go is the book focuses mostly around the Western elite, and I know that that's obviously where most of the power in the world does reside. But we are seeing, as far as I can see anyway, a changing dynamic around the world. And obviously, I'm talking about the rise of China and India and Russia. How do they fit in with this? I'm sure they've got their own elites as well. Does that slot in and complement with Western elitism and capitalism, or does it pose a threat to it?
The biggest perceived threat by the Western policy groups, the Atlantic Council and Trilateral Commission, is Russia.
Right.
China is an economic threat. Russia really isn't. But Russia has their 5,000 nuclear bombs and vast resources that could be developed, and they want them to be developed. China has made huge transitions in building a middle class, eliminating poverty, in rural settings. I mean, the transformation that's happened in the last 40 years in China is just tremendous and very positive for most people. Yes, there's still a single party Politburo and a class of elites, but their goal is to build economic stability and improvement for everybody in the country. That is not the goal of the West. The goal of the West is continue to concentrate wealth in the 1%.
Right.
So, the Chinese billionaires don't have any they can't use their economic wealth to try to make governmental changes and control the government. They're just not allowed to do that. So I think that we will. I'm part of this next book and William Robinson really said, you got to bring China in. And so I will be putting together I've already started a big file on China and their economics and that kind of thing. So that'll be part of the book I'm going to write by April this year. Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait to read it, man. It sounds fascinating. And what is Russia's standing in all of this then? I mean, I can't tell what's going on with Russia anymore. Is it communist, capitalist, something in between, a kleptocracy, or what's going on?
They're pretty much capitalist in the sense that the oligarchs acquired the wealth of the Soviet Union and privatized it. So there's an elite class of wealth owners in Russia. They had Yeltsin was allowing U.S. investments there, and basically Putin reversed that. And so that free-flowing U.S. Global capital going into Russia, protected and safe, has basically been reversed, and it became Russian oligarchs that were controlling the wealth and the investments in Russia. There was a huge decline, of course, in working class decisions, but that's been improving over the last decade. So Putin has been very aware that they have to allow a working class to have some growth and achievement and that.
Yeah,
but right. The West's ideology, NATO's approach, has always been to see Russia become fully capitalist and allow for private capital be invested there. And
right.
And they just don't, not anymore. Yeltsin did, but they don't anymore. And we're still, they're a big influence. There's still $1 billion even today with the war going on. The U.S. is still buying $1 billion a month worth of Russian products and resources. And groups like BlackRock and the big banks and the investment companies have offices in China. So the Chinese billionaires can invest in BlackRock or allow their money to be invested and involved. So I will be looking at that dynamic as part of the next book to see how close the asset management companies are in terms of cooperative working capital in terms of China and eventually Russia. But it's concerning. The U.S. during the Cuban Missile Crisis, a lot of people don't know this, but John Pilger laid it out quite clearly. The U.S. Nuclear forces were ready to fire on Russia if they brought missiles into Cuba, which they had, and we found out about it, and it became a world crisis. It came very close to global war. That is still possible if the U.S. continues to militarily try to dominate both Russia and China.
Right.
China has 1 or 2 foreign military bases, naval shipyard in Sri Lanka, and the U.S. has 800 bases worldwide, completely surrounding China and Russia.
Yeah.
And quite ready to destroy them. So during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the U.S. forces not only had targeted Russia, But the policy was to also target China. And had it gone to nuclear war then, we would have taken out every Chinese major city and destroyed them, even if they weren't attacking us.
Jesus Christ.
So the feelings of anti-communism were paramount in American and NATO, the European elite classes, and in many ways very dangerous. And they continue to concentrate military power to threaten Russia and to threaten China, and of course Venezuela, Iran, and Cuba, and North Korea as well. If you don't play the capital game, you're not safe.
Well, nobody is safe.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Jeez, it's just so terrifying on so many different levels. And that's why I think the power of your book is so important. And more people, I hope, will go and buy the book after reading this, because I think in looking at the scale of the problem, being able to whittle it down to the actual names of the individuals, the human beings that we're talking about, not abstract institutions or notions or concepts, the actual people that we're talking about. You've identified them and explored them and explained them in this book. And I think that is such a powerful starting point for clarity of moving forward with some desperately needed urgent action.
Yeah, these people, they have families, they have homes, they have offices. Mostly it's very, very hard to get an email address for them directly or find out and that wasn't my goal. You could use tax records to find out where their homes are, but that wasn't my goal. My goal is to say, okay, these are the people that if you know them or we need to talk to them, and they need to be making policy decisions that benefit the world, not the 1% and the billionaires and millionaires they represent.
So what needs to happen then in order to move towards a movement for change? I mean, it seems to me as if we are up against an unstoppable force here that's got the governments, the military, the media, the educational system, and all of the money in the world in its pocket. So what can we do, and do we stand a chance?
Democratic social movements of nonviolent non-cooperation and the identification of the most powerful and a challenging of them directly.
But what specifically can people get involved with? When they get up tomorrow, what action can they take? I mean, is it joining a protest movement or a campaign group? Is it lobbying their representatives? Is it civil disobedience and non-cooperation?
All the above.
All of the above, right.
But most of the people in the world, they're just getting by. If you're living on $10 a day, you don't have any capabilities, and you may have to work 2 jobs to do it. So for those of us academics, policymakers, researchers, we have to identify and make very clear what's going on in the world, and who are the people that could change it, that could make a difference. And we see some minor efforts. The EGS movements are most of the companies now in the world have some policy statements about that. But they still continue to do very negative things. And the ideology or the media is not going to expose them when it's privately owned by them as well.
Well, we've got a tough challenge ahead of us, but we've got to make it work because, as you say, if we don't do it peacefully and democratically, it's going to blow up of its own accord. So we're at a crossroads right now from the way that I see it. And I applaud you for the book that you've written, which is an absolutely essential and indispensable tool in the movement towards a hopeful, peaceful and democratic change. So thank you so much for putting together such a brilliant book. And I can't wait for the next one. You said it's called Titans.
The working title right now is Titans of Capital. Giants were the corporations. When I said giants in the global power elite, the giants were the $trillion-dollar investment companies. The Titans will be the people who are on the board of directors, and I'm going to go with the top 10 investment companies, and they currently have about $50 trillion that they're investing.
And we're looking at a release perhaps late next year?
I have a 7 Stories Press, supposed to get it to them by April, May. It'll probably be about a year from now.
I can't wait. Can't come quick enough for me. But Peter, thank you so much. I know I promised you I'd do an hour. We've just gone a bit over, so I'm going to have to let you. I could literally ask you questions and pick your brains all night long, but I know that I can't do that. So
well, it's fun. It's good. I haven't done many interviews. I've been saying no to most folks because I really have to concentrate on getting this book done. But you intrigued me. It was London, and I said, okay, fine, let's do it.
Well, I was very persistent. I think you very politely relented to my relentless nagging, I think is what happened.
All right.
Well, Peter Phillips, thank you so much for stopping by and blowing our minds today. We all really appreciate it, and we appreciate you and everything you do. Thanks for the incredible book. Giants by Peter Phillips is out now. Peter Phillips, thank you so much for joining us, and I can't wait for the next book. Best wishes with the writing, and hopefully we'll speak to you when that one comes around.
Okay, James. Thanks a lot.
Cheers, Peter. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Professor Peter Phillips, ladies and gentlemen, put it together for him. What do you think of that? Mind-blowing stuff, huh? I can't praise this book highly enough. I've never seen anything quite like it, where he's actually just like a directory of the world's elite, the string pullers, you know? These are the guys. And I promised at the start that I would give you some of the names. Now, I'm not going to rattle off, nearly 400 names or whatever on a podcast. That would just be boring and pointless, right? But I'm going to rattle through a little selection, and let's see how many of these people any of you have heard of, right? There's a few familiar faces in there, right? But I guarantee you that most of you have not heard of 99% of the names that I'm about to reel off, right? So get a pen and paper and scribble some of these down and just research some of these dudes. Just put one into Google, right? And just do some reading and be like, wow, this dude is in tons of different policy groups and company boards and think tanks and governments. And he happens to be absolutely loaded as well. So get your Greg Palast investigative journalist hat on, get your pen and papers and scribble down some of these bad boys. You ready for it? Okay, here we go. Tim Diamor, Sharon L. Allen, Ablatif Al-Hamad, Michael Ashley, Sergio Balbino, Thomas J. Baltimore, Oliver Bate, James A. Bell, Iris Bonet, Jack Bovinder, Crandall Bowles, Frank Bramble, Tim Breeden, Mark Bryant, William Dudley, Roger Ferguson, Jacob Frenkel, Paul Krugman, Christian Neuer, Larry Fink, James Diamond, John McFarlane, Axel A. Weber, Jane Harmon, Carla Hills, Bo Liedergart, Mario Monti, Louis Rubio, Peter Sutherland, Paul Volcker, Thomas L. Blair, Richard Burton, Ronald Freeman, Sherry Goodman, John Huntsman, Jeff Books, Rupert Murdoch, Thomas Raab, Sumner Redstone, and loads and loads and loads more of dudes that you've never heard of. Just see what I'm saying? It's not Bezos, it's not Trump, it's these sneaky dudes behind the scenes. You could walk past them in the street tomorrow and not know it, man. But these people literally form the policies and the constructs within which the rest of us on the entire planet have to live within. Our governments can't make policies unless they conform to what these guys want. They are the elite. If you want to know who the elite are, buy Giants by Peter Phillips right now. And then let's knock our heads together and figure out what the hell we're going to do about it. Because if we don't do something soon, there won't be a planet to protest on. And on that happy note, I'm going to bid you farewell for another week. It's great to be back again. I hope you've all been awesome in my absence. And don't forget, if you enjoy these podcasts, please do subscribe, follow, leave me a rating, leave a review, and send me some suggestions of other interesting people that I should get on and talk to. Have an awesome week. Be awesome, stay awesome, be awesome to others. And I shall see you next week with an episode which I think is going to ruffle a few of your feathers, which of course makes me very happy. So tune in for that one. I'll see you next week. See ya.